There was once a guy who looked in the mirror every morning, not because he loved how he looked, but because he was scared of what he might see if he looked away. He acted really important, always wore nice clothes, always put on a show for everyone. People thought he was cool, wished they were him, or were scared of him. But when he shut the door at night, when everyone stopped clapping, the quietness was too much to handle. He needed people to keep telling him he was great. But he never actually felt great. And that's the weird thing about narcissists. On the outside, they look super strong, shining with confidence, full of charm, impossible to not notice. But under all that acting is a breakable person, always looking for someone to say they're good, always scared of being normal. Understanding how a narcissist thinks is one of the most interesting and sad things to learn about people. We usually think of narcissism as being stuck up, caring too much about looks, or thinking only about yourself. But the real story is way more complicated. Narcissism isn't really about loving yourself. Actually, it usually comes from not truly loving yourself at all. It's about building a fake face to cover up the worry, the emptiness, the fear of not being good enough. The narcissist doesn't really love themselves as much as they want others to think they're amazing. They're hooked on what people think, not what's real. And maybe we kind of all get this. Haven't you ever put something on the internet and then looked over and over, waiting for likes, waiting for comments, waiting for proof that people noticed you? Haven't you ever told a story in a way that made you look just a little cooler, a little tougher, a little smarter than you really felt inside? That's a tiny piece of the struggle narcissists have. This need to be told you're good, this fear of no one seeing you. But for the narcissist, this need becomes their whole life. It becomes the main thing around which everything else happens. And to understand them, we need to look inside their world. Psychology gives us ways to think about it. The Big Book of Mental Disorders describes narcissistic personality disorder as acting like you're super special, needing everyone to admire you, and not caring about others' feelings. But those are just words on paper. What does it actually feel like? Imagine living inside a house with glass walls. Everyone can look in. But the second you feel too exposed, you paint those walls with colors, shapes, fake pictures, anything to hide the fact that deep down you feel like an empty room. That's how the emotions work in narcissism. One of the most surprising things experts have learned is that narcissists often come from two very different kinds of childhoods. On one side, there are the kids who got praised too much, told they were special, told they could never do anything wrong. On the other side, there are the kids who felt invisible, ignored, or only loved when they did something amazing. In both cases, the lesson was the same. Love has rules. Love is something you earn by doing things. And so the kid grows into a grown-up who never feels safe just being themselves. Instead, they build a version of themselves that looks like nothing can hurt them. A version that can get applause. But here's the spooky part. The more applause they get, the emptier they usually feel. Because applause feeds the act, not the person. It feeds the mask, not the soul. So they need more and more and more. This is why being friends with a narcissist can feel like standing next to a black hole. No matter how much love you give them, it never seems like enough. And yet they are not bad guys, they are people stuck in a way of surviving. What looks like being stuck up is usually protection. What looks like being cold is usually fear. What looks like tricking people is usually a desperate try to keep their breakable world from falling apart. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Brain science has shown that narcissists often have extra activity in brain parts connected to thinking about themselves. They are super aware of themselves when around other people. Imagine walking into a room and constantly looking around. Who's noticing me? Who's admiring me? Who's ignoring me? That nonstop checking on yourself creates a tiring inner life. And yet from the outside, it can look easy. The smile, the story, the way they stand, it's all part of the show. Now, let's stop here and ask a question. If narcissists are so deeply unsure of themselves underneath, why do so many of them do well in being leaders, being famous, or running businesses? Why do we like them? The answer is uncomfortable, because being charming is like a magnet. Confidence, even when it's fake, makes people pay attention. And our world gives rewards for attention more than being real. Think about it. The loudest people get the microphone, not always the smartest. The boldest things people say spread faster than the most careful truths. Narcissists do great in this world because they know how to play the game. They know how to make themselves impossible to forget. But here's the sad part. The exact thing that makes them do well in public often makes them alone when private. Real closeness requires being open about your feelings. It requires saying, I am scared, I have problems, I am human. But for the narcissist, those words feel impossible, like showing a cut that could never get better. So they keep the mask on, and by doing that, they often ruin the exact relationships they want the most. Think about this weird situation. Narcissists need people to live. But they also fear people will figure them out. They want to be admired, but fear real closeness. They want love, but can't believe it unless it's constant, overwhelming, almost like worship. This is why relationships with narcissists often feel like a pattern. Charm, intensity, then distance, coldness, pulling away. It's not always mean on purpose. Sometimes it's simply the pattern of a person who doesn't know how to be loved without putting on a show. Experts call this the narcissistic wound. At the center of narcissism is a wound so deep that the person spends their life protecting it. And here's the part that's easy to forget. That wound was usually created when they were kids long before they had a choice. So when we think about narcissists, we shouldn't think of villains, but of kids who learned to build a wall because being unprotected was too scary. But if we stop here, we miss something really important. Because narcissism is not just how one person thinks. It's also a mirror of our world. We live in a world that constantly tells us to make things look perfect, to perform, to turn our lives into brands. We get rewards for how we look, not who we are. In that way, aren't we all living in a kind of narcissistic time? We may criticize the narcissist, but we also watch their shows. We follow them. We celebrate them. The narcissist is not an alien. They are simply a bigger reflection of what society already thinks is important. Attention, admiration, image. And maybe that's why learning about narcissism matters. It's not about calling others toxic or broken. It's about asking ourselves, where in my life am I performing instead of being myself? Where am I chasing admiration instead of being real? Where am I wearing a mask because I fear the world won't accept my unpolished self? Because here's the truth. Behind every narcissist mask is a story of fear, of wanting, of pain, of surviving. And when we say they're just stuck up or full of themselves, we miss the human behind the show. But I know what you might be wondering. If narcissism is so deeply part of who they are, can it ever change? Can a narcissist ever learn to love for real, to let go of the mask, to live without the endless need for people to say they're good? That's the question we'll look at next. And the answer might surprise you because it's not simple. It's not about breaking the mask right away. It's about something much deeper. So can a narcissist change? The answer is complicated. At the center of narcissism is a weird situation. The mask keeps them safe, but it also traps them. They cannot take it off without feeling exposed, and yet they cannot truly connect while wearing it. For change to happen, there must be a moment when the pain of the mask is worse than the fear of being open. Sometimes this happens through losing things, relationships falling apart, careers going badly, the realization that admiration is not the same as love. Sometimes it happens through therapy, when a skilled helper slowly, gently helps them see the kid behind the armor. But even then, getting better is fragile, because to ask a narcissist to drop the mask is to ask them to go through the exact wound they've been protecting their entire lives. And yet, growing is possible. Experts have found that with time, thinking about themselves, and real support, some narcissists can learn to care about others' feelings, to accept not being perfect, to trust in love that is not earned through putting on a show. But this journey is not about destroying the ego. It's about making it softer. It's about letting the self be human again. Not extraordinary, not unbeatable, but simply enough. This brings us to a deeper truth. Narcissism in many ways is something everyone struggles with. Maybe we don't all wear masks as heavy, but don't we all wear masks of our own? Don't we all edit our lives before showing them to the world? Don't we all have times where we'd rather be admired than understood? That's why this topic feels so important, because in every narcissist story, there's a reflection of our own. Think about how social media has grown. Think about the way it has changed our lives. The like button, the follower count, the perfect image. Aren't these little seeds of narcissism that we water every day? We are told to chase attention, to create versions of ourselves that shine brighter than our truth. And over time, we may even forget the difference. This is not to say that everyone online is a narcissist, but it is to say that our world makes the narcissistic habits already inside us stronger. And when we judge the narcissist, maybe what we're really judging is our own need for approval reflected back at us, but bigger. Here's something that interests me. Researchers see a difference between two kinds of narcissism: grandiose narcissism and vulnerable narcissism. Grandiose narcissism is the classic picture we know. The confident, charming, sometimes stuck-up person who seems larger than life. Vulnerable narcissism, on the other hand, is quieter, more hidden. These people may not brag or demand attention, but they still live with the same breakable self-esteem, the same hunger for validation, the same trouble with real closeness. Vulnerable narcissists might even look shy, but beneath that shyness is the same inner struggle. Why does this matter? Because it shows us that narcissism isn't always easy to spot. Sometimes it's not the loudest voice in the room. It's the quiet one who still fears rejection so deeply that they cannot let themselves be fully known. So let's return to the human level. What does it feel like to be close to a narcissist? Many people describe it as confusing. At first, there's often an amazing charm. They make you feel special, chosen, seen in ways you've never felt before. But slowly, cracks appear. The need for admiration becomes too much. The relationship feels one-sided. And when you try to get closer to touch the real person behind the mask, you may find distance, defensiveness, even coldness. It can feel like loving something that's not real. You keep reaching, but the closer you get, the further it goes away. But here's the way of thinking that changes everything. Narcissists are not simply tricksters. They are survivors. They learned early on that to be loved, they had to perform, and they never stop performing. This doesn't excuse hurtful behavior, but it does explain it. And when you see it that way, the story of narcissism becomes less about ego and more about pain, less about being stuck up and more about wanting, less about selfishness and more about fear. So what can we learn from this? First, that caring is not about excusing but about understanding. When you understand how a narcissist thinks, you begin to see the kid behind the mask, the wound behind the armor. That doesn't mean you should let yourself be drained or treated badly. Boundaries are essential, but it does mean you can hold the truth with kindness. Narcissists are not evil, they are hurting. Second, we can turn the mirror on ourselves. Where in our own lives do we rely on putting on a show instead of honesty? Where do we chase validation instead of connection? Where do we wear masks because we fear being seen as ordinary? Learning about narcissism isn't just about them, it's about us. And third, we can remember that true strength is not in being unbeatable, but in being open. The narcissist teaches us through their struggle that the human soul does not need applause. It needs acceptance. It does not need to be admired. It needs to be known. It does not need to be perfect. It needs to be real. Imagine just for a moment what would happen if a narcissist could drop the mask. Imagine if they could stand in front of the mirror and instead of needing to be extraordinary, they could whisper to themselves, "I am enough." That moment would be freedom. That moment would be healing. And maybe in small ways that is the journey for all of us to take off the masks we wear to be seen not for the performance but for the truth. Because here is the biggest weird situation. Narcissists want love more than anything, but their exact defenses against rejection make it impossible for them to truly receive it. And isn't that in some way the story of all of us? We want to be loved as we are, but we fear being rejected as we are. So we polish, we edit, we perform, but the performances keep us apart while our souls want closeness. The way a narcissist thinks then is not just a medical label. It is a mirror of the human struggle between performance and being real, between fear and wanting, between mask and self. To study them is to study ourselves. To judge them too harshly is to forget that their mask is only a heavier version of our own. So the next time you hear the word narcissist, remember it is not just about ego. It is about survival. It is about the kid who once thought, "If I'm not perfect, I won't be loved." It is about the grown-up who still believes that voice even after all these years, and it is about us too. Because if we're honest, we all carry some version of that voice within us. The challenge then is not simply to analyze the narcissist, but to ask, how do we step into a life where we no longer need the mask? How do we build relationships where we can be ordinary, imperfect, real, and still loved? That is the deeper question. The one that takes us beyond psychology into philosophy, beyond diagnosis into meaning. And maybe the answer is simpler than we think. Maybe it begins with bravery. The bravery to sit with our own worries without rushing to cover them. The bravery to be seen in our flaws and to let others be seen in theirs. The bravery to let go of admiration and look for connection instead. Because in the end, the story of the narcissist is not just their story. It is a warning and a reminder. A warning of what happens when the mask becomes our whole identity. And a reminder that beneath all our performances, what we want most is not applause, it is love. So let me leave you with this thought. Understanding how a narcissist thinks is not just about understanding others, it is about understanding ourselves. When we look at their mask, we are divided to notice our own. And when we see their wound, we are invited to take care of ours. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us find the courage to be real, then one day, even the most hurt among us will no longer need the mask at all.